Welcome to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast with Corey Shapiro. We're continuing our ebook summary. We're up to chapter 7. We're going to start with a rule, actually 2 rules. Rule number 1, the court is always right, which is the name of the chapter. Rule number 2, when the court is wrong, see rule number 1. I learned that the hard way. I hope you don't. Realize the advice in this chapter, or the information in this chapter, is trying to prevent a budget-busting trial. And judges, unless you have some emergency, really want you to settle. And the tools they use is primarily the court conference. And you start off with this preliminary conference, so involved. You first have to do these financial statements. You got to disclose your income, your assets, your expenses, your liabilities, what you paid your attorney in most states. You go into court, you got to fill out this preliminary conference form, giving a roadmap for the court of what's going on. And then hopefully you'll talk about settling substantive issues. Something that's actually important, like how can we resolve maintenance or child support or equitable distribution? And if not, you're in the system. And what the court does is you have these conferences every so often. Could be every few months, every couple of weeks, depends on the judge, where you are, how difficult or easy the situation is. Now, if you have a good judge, the judge may give you these informal opinions about your issues, where you don't have to make motions and spend all that money and time. And they can give you some guidance. Or maybe the court attorney, if the court does these conferences with the court attorney, can give you some guidance. And the whole point here is you're trying to recognize reality, right? Or you're having a lot of hope in your position. Now, you may be hopeful in your position, you might win, right? But at what risk? And is it important? And is there another way to get what you need? Not only talking about wants, we're talking about needs. If you finally can't settle after all these conferences, after producing all this discovery, all this time, maybe even a deposition, which is so costly, so expensive, that's where you have, an attorney asking you questions, the opposing attorney in front of a reporter, just like testimony in court, except it's usually outside of court, either in a conference room, it could be virtual. But what you say in that deposition is going to be a transcript, and that's good as gold if they got you on something. You did all of that. You're getting ready for trial. But before you do, the court's going to order a pretrial conference. And this is where they're going to spend a lot of time with you, really trying to get you to settle, making you think twice about going forward. If the court can't deter you, you may have a trial. You may have a trial before the judge. Some jurisdictions, especially in financial trials, you don't necessarily have the trial before the judge. You could have a trial before a referee, which is like a judge. But the difference is when you have a trial before a referee, the decision of the referee is just a recommendation in most cases to the judge. And then you have to make an application to have that recommendation by the referee confirmed by the judge. Okay? I'm going to call that the mini appeal, or the appeal with the little a. And I would say you have about a 50% chance of changing the judge's mind from something that happened with the referee. What the referee has, though, is your credibility. So any issues of credibility, they usually defer to the referee. Issues of law, or if you can really point out some mistake of fact, the judge may change its mind. Then you have the major appeal, the appeal with the big A. That's where you have the judge decision get an appeal to a different court, the appellate court. I would say if about a 25% chance of winning an appeal, very costly, expensive, time-consuming. But if you have hope, people have won in the appeal and made really big strides. All right, moving to our regular programming, we're up to our quote. Comes from D.K. Simino, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Your ex is not your child's ex. So important to internalize. Your ex is not your child's ex. Think long-term. Think legacy. All right, moving to news, divorce news. The Senate passes recently a bill to protect same-sex marriage. You might be thinking, what's going on here? Wasn't there just a Supreme Court case on that giving same-sex couples the right to marry? Well, they're concerned. Liberals are concerned that the court may overturn that, and they want to codify the law so there's no mistake that all same-sex couples are going to enjoy that right forever. All right, moving up to question Q. I want to travel abroad during the holidays. I am concerned about my spouse preventing this from happening. What can I do to protect myself? Well, timely question. And here's the answer. First, the issue. When you move outside the jurisdiction of the court, outside the state, things become a little bit more complicated in enforcement orders. So you have to have an agreement. That's the first step, an agreement prior to leaving the jurisdiction of what happens. Now, usually you have a detailed parenting agreement at the end of the game, but if you're just starting the process, you might have just something informal. And I'm not sure if you need a writing to confirm a travel schedule or a stipulation, an agreement, even a court order to define the travel schedule, but there has to be some meetings of the mind where the children are going, and what's the travel schedule, what's the itinerary, just in case something happens. Okay, another thing to think about when you're thinking about this first step, think about what country they're visiting. Some countries recognize U.S. laws. That's the Hague Treaty. And some countries don't follow the treaty. And if things get really serious, you might even have to have a bond that is giving incentive for that parent to return, or a court order. That could be another thing the court can do. All right, second step, passport. Can't leave the country without the passport, right? Who gets the passport? Who keeps it? Do you even have a passport? If the child's under 16, you need to have both parents consent for that passport. All right, third step. Now, you got that agreement, you got the passport, but did you actually just double check with the airline what they need? Maybe they need some consent form. If you're only having one parent travel, the airline doesn't want to get sued. So make sure you have a consent form from the other parent, something in writing. It could maybe be notarized. Again, I would check with this airline to see what they need. And then the fourth and final step is communication. There's so many differences of opinion of how often, how little you can communicate. Time zones, when you can return. Can you return a day before school starts? Can you miss school? So make sure you have proper communication. Really going to go a long way. All right, positive perspective. It comes from a quote from Gene Hill. When you fall in a river, you're no longer a fisherman, you're a swimmer, right? This is really going to that armchair quarterback. You talk to people about your divorce, and from a very safe vantage point with maybe very different facts, and the emotions are not there, low conflict, not many emotions, not triggered. You're thinking so clearly, and they're giving you all this advice. But when you fall out of that boat, and you stop talking about philosophy, and you're talking, where the rubber meets the road, right? You're in the water. You're like, emotions taking over. You're panicking. Now, when you are in this swimming situation and the water's rough and you might be shark infested, are you going to give up, or are you going to recognize your reality and do what you have to do? Maybe tread water, swim back to shore, swim to the boat, what you need to do. And this is the difficult times. These are the difficult divorce. These are the tough choices you have to make. But the sooner you make these tough choices, the sooner you can move on and chart a new path in your life. Okay. We end with our disclaimer. Remember, this podcast is for information purposes only. Please consult with your attorney before acting on the information contained in this podcast. Until next time, be creative, not reactive.